In 1986, the United States launched airstrikes against Libya. In 2002, its focus shifted toward Iraq. Years later, Syria became another battlefield where American military power tried to reshape the balance of the Middle East. Time and again, the United States has demonstrated that it possesses both the military capability and the political influence to alter the course of entire nations. Yet there is one country that has remained an exception for decades. That country is Iran. Even today, the United States and Israel continue searching for weaknesses inside Iran's defensive system. They look for pressure points, political divisions, economic vulnerabilities, military openings. For more than 6 centuries, Iran's borders have remained remarkably stable. Arab armies expanded their influence. Turkic dynasties fought for dominance. The Russian Empire pushed south. The British Empire projected its power across the Middle East. Yet despite countless invasions, rivalries, and wars, Iran itself has survived with its core territory. Why? What makes Iran fundamentally different from so many other countries in the region? Why has conquering this land proven so extraordinarily difficult throughout history? The answer begins long before modern weapons, long before missiles, long before nuclear programs. It begins with geography. Because before Iran ever built an army, nature had already built a fortress. If you enjoy documentaries rather than headlines alone, take a second to let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. To understand Iran in a single sentence, imagine one of the largest natural fortresses on Earth. Unlike castles built by kings, this fortress was built over millions of years by mountains, deserts, and seas. Almost every direction from which an invading army could approach, these natural barriers have shaped Iran's history far more than most people realize. To the southwest stretches the massive Zagros. These mountains separate the Iranian plateau from the plains of Iraq. Their steep valleys, narrow passes, and rugged cliffs create one of the most difficult landscapes for any large military force to cross. For an invading army, numbers alone are not enough. Heavy equipment struggles to move efficiently. Every narrow mountain pass becomes a potential defensive position. As the Zagros Mountains extend toward northwestern Iran, they become even higher and more difficult to cross. Near the Turkish border, the landscape transforms into an almost continuous wall of mountains. Unpredictable weather and limited routes of advance. Every kilometer becomes expensive. Where mountains begin to disappear, wetlands often take their place. Near the areas where the Tigris and Euphrates river systems approach each other, large marshlands have historically created another obstacle. Slow, dangerous, and logistically exhausting. Looking north, another defensive wall appears. The Alborz Mountains rise dramatically between central Iran and the Caspian Sea. These mountains contain some of the highest peaks in the region. Many roads twist through narrow valleys where a relatively small defending force can delay a much larger attacker. These mountains have protected northern Iran from outside invasions. Now turn toward the east. Chains of smaller mountains stretch along much of Iran's borders with Afghanistan and Pakistan. Together, they form another natural defensive belt. Access into the country, they force movement through limited routes that are easier to monitor and defend. When viewed from above, mountains guard the west. Mountains protect the north. Mountain systems and harsh terrain shield the east, the Persian Gulf. Many people assume that attacking a country by sea is easier than fighting through mountains. In Iran's case, the opposite is often true. Along much of the southern coastline, mountains rise surprisingly close to the sea. That means even if an enemy successfully lands troops on the coast, the real challenge begins immediately afterward. Military history repeatedly demonstrates that invading armies rarely fail because they lose their first battle. They fail because they cannot sustain the campaign afterward. Food, ammunition. Iran's geography amplifies those problems at every stage. An army without supplies cannot continue fighting, no matter how advanced its weapons may be. Iran's natural landscape constantly is difficult to ignore. And the defensive obstacles do not stop at the borders. Inside the country lie 2 enormous deserts, the Dasht-e-Kavir and the Dasht-e-Lut. These are among the harshest environments in the Middle East. Extreme temperatures, limited water. For an invading force, that creates an enormous strategic dilemma. Secure supply routes, then cross vast deserts, and only then begin attempting to control the country. Every stage increases the cost of war. Around 3 minutes into this story, one thing should already be becoming clear. Iran's greatest defense, it may simply be the land beneath its feet. But geography alone has never told the entire story, because the same mountains that protect Iran from outside enemies have also shaped the country's politics, military strategy, and regional influence in ways that continue to affect the Middle East today. And that is where the next chapter of the story begins. Those same mountains that make invading Iran so difficult have also limited Iran's own ability to expand. Throughout history, they encountered the very barriers that had protected them for centuries. Large mountain chains slowed armies. As a result, modern Iran gradually adopted a different approach. Rather than stationing large numbers of Iranian troops across the Middle East, Tehran built relationships with armed groups to extend its reach while avoiding the enormous costs of permanent military deployments. Whether one views this network as deterrence or destabilization, it allows Iran to project power beyond its mountainous borders without constantly sending conventional armies across them. However, it gives Iran control over one of the world's most strategically important waterways. The Strait of Hormuz. Its importance to the global economy is enormous. The Persian Gulf contains some of the largest oil and natural gas reserves on Earth. For much of that energy to reach international markets, it must pass through this narrow maritime corridor. Looking at a map explains why the Strait of Hormuz matters so much. Iran controls almost the entire northern coastline of the entrance. Across the water, Oman controls a relatively small section. The northern coastline contains elevated terrain, numerous islands over large portions of the strait. This means that any military confrontation in the area immediately becomes more complicated than simply sailing ships through open water. The strait itself is narrow enough that global shipping traffic passes through well-defined lanes. Liquefied natural gas exports from Qatar also rely heavily on this route. That is why analysts often describe the Strait of Hormuz as one of the world's most important strategic choke points. A choke point is exactly what the name suggests. A narrow location where movement cannot easily be redirected elsewhere. When tensions rise in the Persian Gulf, financial markets begin calculating risk long before any actual conflict occurs. Even the possibility that extends far beyond its own borders. It is not simply defending itself. It possesses the ability to create uncertainty for countries thousands of kilometers away. Closing the strait would carry enormous economic consequences. Nevertheless, the fact that such a possibility exists forces military planners around the world to consider it seriously. Sometimes, the ability to threaten disruption becomes almost as valuable as actually carrying it out. Iran's coastline along both the Persian Gulf and the Caspian Sea. Unlike many coastlines that consist mainly of flat beaches, these elevations create natural observation points overlooking nearby waters. From a defensive perspective, this terrain makes coastal operations significantly more difficult. Advancing inland would immediately become another battle against geography itself. But Iran's resilience cannot be explained by geography alone. The people. Iran is not a country built around a single ethnic identity. Instead, it is home to numerous ethnic communities. Persians form the majority. Alongside them live Azerbaijanis, Kurds, Arabs, Baloch, Turkmen. Managing such diversity has never been simple. No country with such ethnic diversity remains completely free from political disagreement. History, however, tells a more complicated story. Many of these communities may disagree politically during peacetime. Instead of fragmenting society, foreign intervention has repeatedly encouraged different groups to unite around national defense. It is one reason why outside powers have often found Iran much more difficult to control than expected. It would also have to govern millions of people living across mountains, deserts, isolated valleys, and distant cities. History contains many examples where armies won battles but failed to secure lasting stability afterward. By now, another important pattern should be becoming obvious. Iran is protected by multiple defensive layers operating simultaneously. First comes geography, then strategic waterways, then difficult coastlines, then the complexity of governing an enormous and highly diverse population. But perhaps the strongest layer of all only becomes visible when Iran faces an external enemy. And history provides one of the clearest examples of exactly how that works. One of the clearest demonstrations of Iran's resilience came during the Iran-Iraq War. In September 1980, only months after Iran's Islamic Revolution, Iraq's president, Saddam, believed the timing was perfect. Iran appeared politically divided. Its military was being reorganized. Many experienced officers had been dismissed. The country's new government was still trying to consolidate power. From Baghdad's perspective, Iran looked vulnerable. Saddam expected a quick victory. He believed Iraqi forces could capture disputed territories before Iran had time to recover. Some analysts even predicted that the conflict would last only a few weeks. Instead, it became one of the longest and bloodiest conventional wars of the 20th century. The fighting continued for 8 exhausting years. At the beginning, several important towns were occupied. The initial offensive appeared successful. But as the months passed, new volunteer forces emerged. Large numbers of ordinary civilians joined the war effort. Factories increased military production. The country slowly transformed itself into a society focused almost entirely on national survival. Groups that often disagreed during peacetime suddenly found themselves facing a common external threat. People who normally argued about ideology now fought together for the same country. This phenomenon has appeared repeatedly throughout history. Saddam Hussein had expected internal divisions inside Iran to work in Iraq's favor. The conflict eventually reached a brutal stalemate. Neither side achieved the decisive victory it had expected. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians lost their lives. By the time the war finally ended in 1988, both countries had paid an enormous price. Yet despite 8 years of continuous fighting, Iraq failed to permanently seize Iranian territory. This outcome reinforced an important lesson. Conquering Iran is one challenge. Holding Iran is an entirely different one. Iran covers approximately 1.65 million square kilometers. To put that into perspective, it is one of the largest countries in the Middle East. Its sheer scale creates another defensive advantage known in military planning as strategic depth. Strategic depth refers to the political, economic, and military centers. The greater that distance becomes, the more difficult every stage of the invasion becomes. Fuel must travel longer distances. Food becomes harder to deliver. Meanwhile, the defending country continues operating closer to its own infrastructure. This difference becomes larger with every passing day. Iran's most important cities also benefit from this geography. Tehran, Isfahan, Mashhad. Many of the country's major population centers are located well inside the country, rather than directly on vulnerable frontiers. Even if an invading force crossed the border successfully, its campaign would still be far from over. It would have to continue advancing through mountains, deserts, and difficult terrain, while maintaining thousands of tons of supplies every single day. History repeatedly demonstrates that logistics often determine the outcome of wars more than battlefield victories themselves. Military commanders have long understood a simple principle. Amateurs study tactics. Professionals study logistics. Winning a battle does not guarantee winning a war. The farther an army moves from its own bases, the more fragile its position becomes. Iran's geography magnifies that problem at every stage. This is why many military analysts argue that the greatest challenge in any hypothetical invasion of Iran would not be entering the country. It would be sustaining operations after entering it. And this brings us back to the question we asked at the very beginning. Why has Iran remained so difficult to conquer? The answer is not one single reason. It is the combination of many. Its mountains create natural defensive walls. Its deserts complicate movement. Its coastlines and the Strait of Hormuz provide strategic leverage far beyond its borders. Its size creates enormous logistical challenges for any invading force. Its ethnic diversity may generate internal political tensions, but history shows that external threats have often united those same communities, rather than divided them. Finally, centuries of surviving invasions have shaped a national mindset. None of this means Iran is invincible. Every country has weaknesses. Every military has limitations. Every political system faces internal pressures. But history suggests that defeating Iran quickly, or occupying it for a long period, would be among the most difficult military operations any modern power could attempt. In many ways, Iran's strongest weapon is not a missile. It is not a tank. It is not even its army. Its greatest advantage is the geography beneath its feet, combined with a strategic depth that has frustrated invading powers for centuries. Sometimes, the most powerful fortress is not built from stone. It is built from mountains, deserts, distance, and time itself. If you enjoyed this documentary and want more in-depth explanations of history, geopolitics, and military strategy, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next documentary.